Public CEO Report is a podcast that provides insights about the public sector and public policy for the benefit of decision makers and leaders powering our communities. I'm your host, Ryder Todd Smith, and today we're joined by Peggy Flynn, the City of Petaluma's city manager. Peggy, welcome to the Public CEO Report.
Thanks so much, Ryder. It's a privilege to be here.
It's great to have you here. First of all, I just want to say I love Petaluma. Been to the city a few times, stayed in hotels there. It's a quaint little town and always a pleasure to get to visit you guys up there.
The historic fabric in our downtown is just amazing.
It is. You have a great kind of updated, it was an old building, I think, but updated with a modernized interior hotel there. That's quite lovely.
Hotel Petaluma.
Yes.
Our community crowdsourced for that back in the last century.
Really?
Yes.
Oh.
That's the Petaluma way.
Okay. I like that. That kind of gives me a little bit of San Luis Obispo vibes. There's a hotel Slow there was built by a bunch of local families with a developer who came to town, but it was local money. And so It's kind of like your community elders are the ones who help make it all happen and create this incredible reset or asset for the community, which is a really incredible hotel. So that's very nice. It's nice to have really good digs to come stay at, and then it's all walkable to your immediate vicinity of your nice downtown.
It is indeed.
So, Peggy, the last time I got to see you IRL, because I don't think I had the pleasure of running into you at the recent City Manager Conference, was at the Capio Conference, where you were a featured speaker to discuss your career through the PIO world, and then ultimately making to the city manager seat, which is a unique path. And that's one of the reasons I want to talk to you. Plus, you were just a great speaker and super inspirational. And I'm always trying to bring some interesting people on this podcast to have a conversation. Let's back up a second and just tell me a little bit about your career, how you got started in the early days and coming all the way through to today.
Sure. So I was a journalism student at San Jose State. So excited to go work for the San Jose Mercury News. They were one of the first newspapers to create the Sunshine Laws in California. And so as a diehard journalist, I was a stringer through college, and I took a local politics class. And I just got the bug. Terry Christensen was my professor, and he helped me get an internship at the San Jose Redevelopment Agency, where I realized my role. My role was to demystify government, and I haven't stopped doing that since. So, I took on, I finished my internship and took on a fellowship. San Jose State provided me a fellowship. And in my early months of that fellowship, working for the president of the university, the redevelopment agency created a brand new position, which was a communications director for the redevelopment agency. So I had to make a really tough decision, and I walked into Dr. Kretz's office and said, I gotta take this job. I'm excited about it. We were at the time the largest redevelopment agency in California in terms of tax increment, and we were doing amazing things. And I never turned back, and didn't finish that fellowship. So, it was a trade-off.
And then walk me, kind of through that path. So now you get your first comms job, and were you pretty much comms at a couple different agencies until you made that leap from PIO to city manager?
I would say PIO is not always a fixed position, especially in an organization as agile as we were at the redevelopment agency. So becoming legislative affairs and project manager, really having to understand all facets of the operations. So it wasn't just, news releases, it was strategic communications, crisis communications, understanding and being at the table, trying to understand, what was behind many of the much of the work that we were doing. So, really immersing myself in the operations and in the goals of the organization, and it really morphed into much more than a traditional PIO role. And then it really served me as I went to later the Santa Clara Valley Water District and other roles in local government.
So, first of all, I want to go back to something you said about demystifying government and get your broad take on that, because that's such an important thing. But before I do, both for the city managers that listen to this and the PIOs that listen to this, you raised an important point that comes up for me all the time too, which is the PIO in the room with the senior leadership team, right? Is the PIO treated as a advisor and having wisdom to share, even if they don't have a department there? I mean, maybe they're running a comms department of 2 people or 3 people or no one. Maybe they are the lone PIO, but should they be in that room when the senior leadership team is having their meetings and discussions? Obviously, I'm a comms guy. I think, of course, comms should be in the room. We like so many of these problems happen because we fail to communicate them properly, and then things blow up on us. But I'm interviewing you. You tell me, why should the PIO be in that room?
Well, communication drives policy, and lack thereof, or when you're leading with comms and you drive policy, you issue spot. It's so essential. It's an essential goal to be to communicate well and to be able to issue spot and be out front and be able to speak to your constituents and speak to your council, board, your staff. So it's really essential in everything, and it's a skill that doesn't always get taught or refined in our roles as city managers. And we look to a PIO. Oftentimes, the PIO is kind of the icing on the cake, and it's like, well, those are nice to have, but as you realize in your role, we call you when there's a crisis, and the proactive nature of communications, especially in the public sector, is essential in success of a city.
Yeah. I would always much prefer the client call me as a proactive calm situation than it's blown up. And then I'm getting the phone call saying, hey, we got a problem here. We're going to have to reset.
Well, trying to do post-mortem on an issue that happens, it's much easier to get ahead of it than it is at mop and bucket crew.
I'm curious. So what have you seen change since your time as a journalist and now, taking over that first PIO job for a public agency? What have you seen change in terms of the demand for communications and the evolution? I certainly have strong opinions on this, but I want to hear your perspective on this.
Well, I mean, even when I was a meager journalism student, I remember Guy Kawasaki from Apple talking about the changing face of the newspaper industry. And at that time, we were losing small mom and pop newspapers. And the funny thing is, I'll tell the story. I guess you can cut this one out, but it was hilarious because Guy told me a story. He said, well, yes, everything's going online, but you can't bring the computer to the toilet. And I laughed because, now thinking about, well, we got our iPhone or our cell phone, our smartphone with us at every moment.
Ironically, I think that's where most newspapers are read at this point, is on the toilet.
I know. But it's the traditional sense of media has definitely, consolidated, and we are looking at a whole host of places where people get information. And the challenge for cities is trying to be the first place that their residents come for city information. And unless you've established it yourself in that manner, they're going to get information on Nextdoor and places that aren't accurate and that you don't really have the ability to affect. So you're either proactive or you are doing the mop and bucket crew that I always tell the team that we really want to avoid.
Right. Do you have a PIO in Petaluma, or did you
carry
them?
A brilliant PIO, Jameson Bunn. She is brilliant.
That must be a daunting task to be a PIO for a PIO city manager.
I think she enjoys it because we can actually brainstorm. There's so many times that as a PIO, you know this, you're a one-person shop, and it's really hard to get people to listen. So I think I would hope that Jameson feels that she's supported and valued, very valued.
When did you decide that you wanted to go from a PIO function, which sounds like it dominated most of your career, into the city manager seat?
I never had anticipated doing that. I I really enjoyed, actually really enjoyed the trajectory of different roles in cities and in county organizations, and ending up in Nevada as the assistant city manager, which I still argue is the best position in a city, because you have a lot of exposure, and at the same time you can turn your phone off at night and say, you know what? City manager will get that.
Right.
But all kidding aside, I'm a Petaluma resident. My husband and I have a ranch literally 5 miles out of the center of town. And I was driving through my city every day, going to Nevada, going, gosh, what is going on in Petaluma? We have such an amazing community. We have such a supportive community. We have a community that wants to see its city succeed. And we had 2 failed sales tax attempts, and we were looming over a potential reorganization or bankruptcy. So timing, it was timing. It really truly is timing. And I think most city managers, I would say it's always timing and fit. And this one was timing and fit. I don't know that I would have ever put my hat in the ring for a city manager, because I really enjoyed the job I was in and the community I was working for.
When you transitioned out of that, although I guess technically you were coming out of an ACM role, so you had other responsibilities there, that gave you even more exposure to departments, never mind the PIO role, which gives you a chance to kind of look into each department, right? Assuming you're doing comms work for Public Works on a project, and then suddenly you're dealing with maybe PD and collaborating on some issue, and then you're contending with finance and their budget at a glance document or their budget communications, and ACM would give you a front row seat. Were there any, making that role move into the city manager job, were there any skills gaps you identified for yourself, or particularly maybe given that so much of your career had been spent in comms, that if other PIOs are listening to this, they may want to consider about how they shore up some of those skill areas if they seek to reach for that city manager function or the ACM function?
Yeah, well, I would say that, throughout my career, and as a communications professional, I think the most important policy document that we have is our budget, right? It speaks to where our money is spent, how we invest in the community. We can, talk till the cows come home about, yes, this is important, but where's our money going? So I learned very early in my career about municipal finance, and I really took that to heart. And even though I don't have a finance background, I really, really, I've looked at hundreds of budgets, and learned very early about how to take a very complex document and make it the cities, and make it accessible to the community. So the community is like, I know where my city's investing, and I can advocate on A, B, or C. So I would say just 2 things, dig deep, get uncomfortable in areas that you think, oh gosh, when I was at the Santa Clara Valley Water District, spending time with engineers to talk about dam safety, DAM, not DAMN, but dam safety, and being able to, go through and really understand, pull out those high level speaking points and messaging that we really want the community. Why should I care? How do we tease that out? So really working, in areas that you typically think, well, gosh, I don't know anything about that, and just diving in with both feet and open mind and open heart, and trying to be strategic and be a strategic partner with every department. And I think that served me well as a communicate or as a city manager because I was able to go into departments and say, hey, I am the CM, but I'm also your strategic partner. How can I help you?
Yeah.
And I think that has served me well, and it's served the community well, and it's served council well.
When I talk with PIOs and city managers about the PIO role, one of the things I often try to say is you want somebody who has the curiosity of an investigative journalist that wants to work on behalf of the organization, because oftentimes our departments are not going to come to us and say, I had this great story, let's go.
No,
they're going to be
absolutely
like,
not.
I'm fixing this street.
They're
And then
trying to
you
get
have to,
their work done.
right. And you have to show up and be like, hey, there's a pretty cool story here. Or, I was reading the budget about this thing. What's really going on in this little thing? Let's go explore this issue. But you have to have that kind of really strong sense of curiosity, frankly, I think, to be able to be successful in that role. And I would say that applies for city managers too. You have to have a really good sense of curiosity because you want to understand the totality of what's going on in such a vast, multi-fingered organization that's, doing everything from finger painting for kids to laying, 40-inch sewer pipes in streets.
Well, and that also helps you issue spot, right? And that helps you get out in front of potential issues, is by being curious and asking a lot of questions. Know what you don't know and be proud of that, because we can't know everything, and everybody's a first-time city manager. So
Yeah.
Petaluma is very unique in that we are a true full-service city. We have our own airport, we have our own transit, we have a water treatment plant, we have a marina, and we run our own ambulance service. So we really truly are fully self-contained, and then for 60,000 residents, it's a lot, and we're an old city, so we got a lot of old craggly rocks to pick up.
So that's let's just let me explore that real quick more. What's your kind of staff count at City of Petaluma? It must be pretty substantial.
Well, it wasn't when I got here. We were 16%. 2008 levels, and we all know what happened in 2008. Most cities did layoffs. We did a third, 30% of our staff in 2008. And I got here in 2019 with about a 7,000 growth in population, and we were 16% our staffing levels. We were about at 240 at the time, and we're now at 403.
Wow. But incredible amount of infrastructure run, especially just between police. It sounds like you have water and sewer.
Yes, we do.
That is, they're very rare. Some of the bigger ones, obviously, maybe in Oakland and in San Francisco, whatnot, but for a 60,000 person population, I would have to think about what other cities in California have a population that size and have everything else you're describing.
Daunting and exciting at the same time.
Yeah. Well, lots of things to use your curiosity to explore and understand. What was, I want to go back to something you said earlier. So we talked about demystifying government. Talk about that a little bit. Like, why do you think people are mystified by government, perhaps specific to California, maybe even specific to local government? Are they more mystified today than they were 30 years ago? And what's underlying that? And what does it look like to demystify government?
Wow, lots to unpack there. I would just say that, first of all, demystifying government's important because of trust. I mean, the underlying, we ask the community to trust us a lot, right? Trust us to, do the right thing, to ensure that your infrastructure is safe, that your city staff are well trained and professional and creative and agile, and that your council is representing you, and that we are investing money wisely and we're being good fiscal stewards. And we're asking for a lot of trust. Mm-hmm. Well, it's very hard to ask for that trust if you aren't demystifying, if you are not making information accessible, if you are not, always answering the why, what's in it for me, or why should I care about this? Or why is this staff report seemingly so technical and difficult to read, and yet why should I care? You're telling me you're working hard, but you're not fixing the potholes in my street, but you're working on some rate study just to, so it's really, it's having to every single moment of the day remind our team of why we're doing this work, and to be able to articulate that. And I've seen staff get very frustrated when I ask, why should we care? Why are you doing this work? Well, I'm doing
Yeah.
it because of SB 123, to meet those requirements. And I'm like, well, but why are we doing it?
Yeah.
And it's a lot, it's a lot to think about, but it really makes it more rewarding when we go out there because people, by breaking down those walls and making things more accessible, they realize that they have um, the ability to advocate even more effectively or trust. Oh gosh, that's what they're doing. That makes so much more sense. And the more you do it, um, you start to bring your spokespeople along in the community. More
Yeah.
people say, no, you know what? I went to the city website and they actually have a whole web page on that project and a simple FAQ that says why they're doing it and what they're not doing and what they are doing. So, and I think right now that people have a lot of places to go for information. And as public sector servants, it's very difficult to be able to get out in front and say, hey, no, 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 it's our information that you want to pay attention to, not the pure interest on Nextdoor that has some urban myth that's
Right.
flying around or some a belief that the city has other designs other than serving the community.
Yeah. One of the axioms I often share is information abhors a vacuum. And so information is going to move in to fill it. It might be good information. Might be bad information, but people are going to start finding the information to fill it in. And they're either going to find it from Bob the Blogger, or they're going to find it on Nextdoor, or they're going to find it on the city website. So I'm constantly trying to advise my clients, like, anticipate where the information vacuums are and fill them as fast as you can. That does take effort and resource, but the consequence of not doing so is trust erosion and kind of a diaspora of information, and that creates all sorts of other complications. You had referenced the fact that a couple of sales tax measures had failed in the city previously. Were you successful in getting some sort of, like, did you adopt sales tax measures after your arrival? And I presume some of those were adopted out of the success of trust building. But what happened there?
So yes, we had two failed sales tax attempts prior to me joining, and I did speak to council in my interview. They had asked me to please provide in my interview, please provide, what's your plan for fiscal and organizational sustainability? And I walked through, there are some very formulaic approach to revenue measure strategy. But the most important part is convincing our community that we need it and why we need it. And so the conversation I had with the council, who eventually hired me, I said, the community believes in us. I see it every day. It's my community. The community believes in us, but it always dies with the seven of you. So unless we can all row in the same direction, I can't be your city manager. And it was very awkward silence. And I was thanked for coming. And I told my husband that night that I did not get the job. I did get the job, and that was a commitment that the council and subsequent councils made on the big things that we have to run in the same direction. We have to be on the same page with messaging, and not just the messaging, but with the understanding of why we're doing what we're doing. So I joined in February of 2019. We launched a fiscal and organizational sustainability effort. Sounds bureaucratic, but what we did was we had drill down workshops on pensions and infrastructure and where did the structural deficit come from and what are the challenges in Petaluma and how much are people paying for the services, what services aren't being provided, which was we had to be really honest, like, wow, we have one AP person for the entire city. I mean, that was crazy. We didn't
Right.
have laptops. It was a crazy time. And then we know what happened. So, early 2020, pandemic hits, and we're
Yeah.
supposed to be on the ballot for our very first sales tax measure in November of 2020. And I had leaders in the community say, boy, kid, you gave it your best shot, but boy, we're hitting unprecedented times, and nobody's gonna, in these uncertain times, nobody's gonna pass, especially a 1 cent sales tax. So community did over 60%. Like I said, in the most uncertain times of our city, of our nation, of our world, and I'm forever grateful for that. And I remind staff, and I tell all new staff when I meet with them, I meet with every new staff person. I say, we exist because the community exists, and we owe everything. And we're a yes and city. So there is no, but it's a yes and. Yes and it might take more resources, or yes and it might take a little longer, but we got to get to yes.
Right.
Community deserves it.
The workshops you referenced, the drill down workshops, those were all public workshops that I assume you're referring
absolutely.
to, and you had good public participation in those, and
we
it wasn't
did.
just the ST, it wasn't just the same 10 people, the STPs.
Well, my first 6 weeks on the job, the council said, well, we got to do our goal setting. So set that up. And as a comms person, I said, wow, okay. I got the community center. I got the largest room in the community center, and I started advertising, and the council was like, why is it taking so long? We just usually sit in the conference room with the city manager. We get a couple gadflies, but what are you doing? And I said, the community's got to come out. We're going to be going out and asking them for one of their largest lifts in our city's history. And we can't be doing the same old and sitting at a conference table and maybe one or two people show up.
Yeah.
So we did this goal setting probably with 250 residents.
Wow.
That stayed from a 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Not one person left. And the staff, the unions came because it was just it was a really amazing, and we did a graphic recording of our takeaways, and it still is displayed in our city council chambers. And I look at it to this day, 7 years later, and we still are following that roadmap of what our community's goals were for their city and what their vision is. Yeah, really proud of that moment. And it was a time for council to say, oh, that, because our council members each had their own constituencies. They were very good at being spokespeople, but to row in the same direction with city staff, that was powerful.
Yeah. I think sometimes, engagement is viewed as risky at times because you never know, it's a little box of chocolates. You're not quite sure what you're going to get out of it. Some engagement efforts you try, you don't get much turnout. You don't, right? That happens certainly. Or you get engagement and it's a bunch of, perhaps insane ideas, which are untenable only because maybe the public hasn't been prepped for like what's realistic, and help us come up with things we can get done. I appreciate the big vision stuff, but we're not going to go build a fleet of unicorns to patrol the streets, right? Like there are limits at times, but so I think this tension sometimes exists between the desire to have community engagement and maybe council perception that they're giving up certain authority if they're involving the public too much in that discussion. When in truth, I kind of view it as like, if we're bringing the community along in the process, it creates broader ownership and more success ultimately in the policy decisions and directions that you're going to make as a city council. So it seems like a pretty good place to start from my perspective. Again, I'm a comms guy, so I'm empathetic to it, but that seems to be one of the risks that folks observe in the community engagement phase.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the council members turned to me as folks were filing in. He said, I hope you know what you're doing. I said, no, I don't, but I did. I felt like I did. Of course, I didn't know how that was going to go, but I thought, what's the alternative? We've been practicing the alternative for decades, and the city was not in a good place.
Yeah. I think that has to be very blunt. And I try to tell this to my clients too. I don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to give it a shot. Like, and worst case scenario, we had a bunch of people come and talk, and hopefully they learn some more about the community and some of the policy issues because they're probably otherwise mystified by it. And we will have heard a bunch of different perspectives. You're still the council. You get to make your decisions. Right. Or we end up with a bunch of folks who at least have some agreement on facts and information, and they've gotten to know some of the personalities of the city, and they're building a little bit more trust, and they feel more comfortable dropping an email or asking a question as opposed to just writing some diatribe and sending it out to the world. So if we make that much progress, that's a good starting point too.
Absolutely.
Do you do a citizen academy or anything?
Our police department does. What we focused on was our fairgrounds property, which is 55 acres in the center of our city, that we kind of abdicated our responsibility to the state for $1 a year for 80 years, literally to put on a 4-day fair. And then the rest of the year, the property was fenced off to our residents.
Wow.
And that lease agreement was, so I start my job, and the first thing is fiscal and organizational sustainability. Let's, make sure that our fiscal affairs are in order and that we are sustainable. And then the second one was, okay, well, we want our fairgrounds back, but it's never been talked about publicly. And it is, it's one of the hottest potatoes out there because there was so much urban myth surrounding that property because it had never been talked about publicly and nobody wanted to touch it. Kind of nuclear, but what a great opportunity. Center of our city, it really was our nest egg. If we had not passed the sales tax measure, I'm sure we would have parceled that off. So it was also our Measure U promise. Like, hey, we got the Measure U. Now what are we going to do at the fairgrounds? We could have done the traditional route of, doing town halls and doing facilitated, conversations, and we would have had the same voices. I went to Cal City's, I think it was the CM conference, or no, maybe it was the annual conference. It was the annual conference. And somebody told me about, I call fondly sell and tells of like, oh, this is the next new cool thing. It was a panel with Healthy Democracy. They are a nonprofit out of Eugene, Oregon, and they do deliberative democracy. And I'd never heard of that. And I mean, I heard about it in Europe, like, they have the kind of the right to die panels that France has stood them up, or some lottery selected, but really, really well-established panels that help make policy decisions, or at least help facilitate policy decisions, because the policymakers are still making the ultimate decision. But anyways, heard Lynn Davis speak, and probably 5 minutes into his talk about deliberative democracy, I said, that is the missing piece of the pie and what we need for the fairgrounds. And we were the first city in the United States. We had the largest lottery selected panel of our residents. We oversampled for K through 12 demographics. We sent them a letter, said that we would pay them $25 an hour, that we would pay for childcare and elder care and technology. Would you please do us the honor of being on our panel? And we had 36 residents who gave us 90 hours of their time. The city did not run that process. We were a stakeholder with all the other stakeholders, including the state, the 4th District Agricultural Association, and the panel curated the information that that's a lot of trust. So if you think holding a first-time goal setting with 300 of our residents was a leap of faith, then you can imagine having a 36-member panel of residents. Yep. Drilling in probably one of the most sensitive topics in our city. It was brilliant because we didn't have World War III at our council meeting, where council ended up resuming management of the fairgrounds because it was so well vetted out that after we got the recommendations by that panel, council adopted those as our guiding principles for negotiations, for programming on the property. We're now in the throes of master planning the property, and it's just been, and we'll be building our first public safety facility in decades. We're going to do the groundbreaking this year on our property, on our residents' Measure U promise, 55 acres. And I think we had 3 or 4 people in the audience that night when council said, all right, we're going to assume management of the property. That could have been totally different.
Right.
You know.
So I think one of the key things that you just described, and I've done a couple projects now where we've asked residents, volunteers to come in and do a deep dive. So we've had these advisory committees. They've been immensely helpful, smaller, right? So in the teens for count and shorter periods of time, either 6 hours or 12 hours of work, but immensely helpful even in that window. Your process you just described was 36 people. They were some, if not all members were paid to be there.
All were paid.
Okay. So essentially they were almost like a paid, I don't want to undermine the quality of the work done, but they were almost like a paid focus group that represented a bunch of diverse constituencies and perspectives. And they were fully supported to be in the process. And they gave up hours and hours and hours of time to be involved in that process. That's a very different process. And I just try to emphasize that point for the audience, for them to just understand like the nature of what was embarked on there and how significant that was. I assume that went, how long do you say that went for?
That was close to 9 months of work, because they also did some charrettes. We had some architects come in and put some sketches to their visions. Very disparate group of people on different sides of the political spectrum. These are people that, I mean, there's a beautiful video on our website, a couple of videos of the residents talking about like, oh, I thought government wasn't for me. These are people that don't usually come to our meetings. They don't have the ability to. They're working 2 jobs. They've got, elder care. They're trying to, they're hoping that their garbage gets picked up and their potholes get filled.
Right.
They didn't feel like they had a voice in local government. So this was so powerful. And I would do it again in a heartbeat. For our charter amendments.
And do you feel, did that group actually come to consensus or total agreement, or was there ultimately like a vote where it was a majority vote carried the day on the recommendations?
Yeah, they weren't voting, but it was consensus building. They all found commonalities. So in their 3 scenarios, which we're using for a master plan process, which is again an incredible foundation that they built for us. There were so many areas of commonality that it was actually, we need that right now on the federal level and probably in the world where 2 very disparate sides of the coin. Like, no, we've got to have our 4-day fair. Well, can't we have the 4-day fair and have other programming for the residents and have city facilities and have some commercial revenue generating opportunities on the property? Answers were all yes, in various iterations. So there wasn't any hard no's. There was no, people really, really respected and listened to one another. And I think it was really beautiful that the city wasn't running that process.
Right.
It was, like I said, it was really powerful, and it was a huge leap of faith, both from the city, but also from the community. Why should I do this? Yeah, I'm getting paid, but is my voice really going to make a difference? And it's set us on a trajectory that we'll never do anything differently, right? So we will always be looking for creative ways to engage our community.
For the residents that participate in that, have they stayed involved in other ways? Are they on commissions? Are they on other committees that have been put together? Have they run for council?
It's been not for council yet, but I would imagine we've gotten a lot of leadership. I mean, there was a lot of leadership development and a lot of voices that have come through and had just, we were a finalist for the All-America City for the National Civic League. And we had some of our folks join our delegation and really didn't have to give them speaking points because they were talking about their city in ways that I said, oh my gosh, I need to write that down. You're absolutely right. We are that city, but I keep forgetting because I've got my head in my work. And so they're in all different facets of our work. And it's been pretty brilliant to watch.
That's great. That's great. That's great. I want to respect time, so I'm gonna. I have just a couple quick questions to wrap up and change direction. The first thing is, what is your advice to other communications professionals who are looking to take their career further into management roles? Like, what would you tell them to do?
Fight for your seat at the table. I would say that, immerse yourself I'll go back to what I said earlier about immersing yourself in your organization and go to those places that you don't feel comfortable, because they probably need your help the most. If they're that unknown and they're just doing their work, they're going to need your support. And it's good to know. It's good to know all facets of the operation, and also be working with, if you're not at the table, work with your city manager, work with your city leadership to talk about strategic communications, to talk about the importance of true engagement of the community, of demystifying, there are so many best practices, CAPIO and 3CMA and the organizations that I've been a member of since the beginning of my career 30 years ago. They've gotten so robust. I mean, every time I go to Capio now, I'm like, wow, so many more people. I see city managers there. I'm like, yes, I would have never seen a city manager there 30 years ago. Yeah. It's reaching across, you are not just a PIO. You are holding the truth of the organization. And how do you get that? How do you get that out there? You need to tell as many people as possible in your organization that you're there to be their thought partner and strategize.
Yeah, agreed. I love that. And then tell me about Petaluma. Why should I come to Petaluma and visit? Give me all my hot tips for coming and generating some sales tax revenue and some TOT for you.
There's always 1 degree of separation in Petaluma. Every place I've ever traveled all over the world, even on the bullet train in Japan, I met somebody who said, "Oh, my wife is from Petaluma," and I said, "No way." We have 1 degree of separation. Petaluma is one of the oldest cities in California, and that said, we're kind of hitting it on all sides. We've got this awesome, in my backdrop, we've got this awesome historic downtown. And we also have a lot of new and exciting residents in our community that are contributing in so many fabulous ways. Yes, we have amazing restaurants and we've got amazing retailers, but we also have amazing makers, and we've got areas in our city, our waterfront. We've got amazing, just really amazing community members that you got to come. You got to take the SMART train and stay a few days, understand our agrarian roots, our agriculture. We're many generations of ag. I'm a rancher. My husband's his family's been here for 6 generations. But just as important, the people have been here a month. And we have the beautiful Petaluma River. It's such a great place to eat local and be local and enjoy the gateway to both Sonoma County and the coast. Everybody drives through Petaluma to go to the coast. So,
yeah, beautiful. All right. Well, I would agree, given my visits there, and it's actually been a while since I stayed in Petaluma, so I can only imagine it's better. But it was great when I was there several years ago. So, congrats on the progress you're making.
thank you.
Final question, which is, if people want to contact you with questions about any of today's discussion, or more about your journey, what's the best way for them to do so?
Email me, absolutely. P Flynn, PFLYNN at cityofpetaluma.org. Or hit me up on LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm always happy to help and reach out.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And that's today's report. My thanks to Peggy for joining us, and from the whole PublicCEO team and myself, Ryder Todd Smith, thank you for your time. We hope you learned something new and inspiring that will help you in your public service. Remember, Public CEO has a daily newsletter that is free to those who sign up at PublicCEO.com. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of the Public CEO Report. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing across all of our platforms so you never miss out on this great content. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and Amazon Music.